and Chilion. And they were Ephraimites from Bethlehem in Judah, and they went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech and the husband of Naomi died, and she was left with her two sons. These two Moabite wives, the name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. They lived there about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her two sons and her husband. Verse 6, then she arose with her daughters-in-laws and to return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she was with her two daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-laws, go, return each of you to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that you may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, even if I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they are grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Verse 14. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, and Ruth clung to her. And she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Verse 19. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they had came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, is this Naomi? She said to them, do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. Praise be to God for the reading of his word. You guys can go ahead and have a seat. Appreciate y'all standing with me there. I know it's a little bit longer one than normal. This morning I want to preach on the phrase for us to consider this morning, this idea, this thought from the text of famine but faithful. Famine but faithful. When I was in high school, I remember playing in a summer soccer league, and there's a few of those around here in this area. And the games would be in the evenings. This is the Augusta County League, and when I was in high school, I didn't make many wise decisions, so I would stay up very late with my friends, and probably to 4 a.m. sometimes just playing games or whatever, hanging out. And then I would sleep into the afternoon. And sometimes I would make that decision, and I'm just going to go about my day and do the activities I need to do. Well, on this day, I prepared to go to the soccer game. I stayed up all night, slept minimal hours, and I was like, you know what? It's game time day. I'm going to go play in this summer league soccer game. And it was like 99 degrees outside. And your brother didn't eat nothing that day. He thought he was just going to wake up and go play a game. And so what happened was I was excited to get in this game. I didn't drink anything all day. Again, I was an unwise teenager. And I get on the soccer field and I'm playing. It's really hot out there. I'm like, you know what? My body feels a little weird. I'm like, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. And so like I'm playing on the field and I'm like, man, I'm getting a little dizzy. Our team was down players at the time. And so like I was like, I know I'll be okay, you know. Well, next thing you know, I'm like, you know what? All right, I'll switch out. I'll go play in goal. I don't have to run around as much. So I was switched with the guy, became goalkeeper. And next thing you know, a ball's coming towards me, and I just dropped. I basically just dropped, and I barely made it off the field. They had to call an ambulance to come pick me up because I was dehydrated. It was a really bad decision. And many times when you realize you're on this pursuit of being famined, you don't always realize it hits you quicker than you realize. That your body becomes weaker. And if you've ever passed out before, you've had that experience before, because if you knew it was going to come, you would probably be a little bit more wise about it. If you've done it a few times, you actually do start to learn. You're like, actually, this is bad. I need to sit down. Well, I had not learned at that standpoint. But now I know the signs, guys. I know the signs. But that was a very interesting experience for me because I was trying to be faithful to my team, to support the game, but I was also famined as well. I was dry. I was malnourished. I was looking for more, even though I didn't fully realize it, and it led to a bad situation. And many times we can function in life as malnourished people, as we're longing for more, but we're struggling with a famine land at times. And that's something we're going to see today in our sermon, because that's what's happening in this context. For Ruth and for her family, they were in a famine land. They moved to a different land, seeking food, seeking harvest. Let's set a stage for this conversation. The book of Ruth takes place in the time frame of the judges, most likely while Gideon was serving as a judge. Between the death of Joshua and the reign of Saul, the nation of Israel was in a state of chaos socially and religiously. These judges were appointed, they were leaders who had previously had military conquest, so they gained respect in that effort, but then were there placed into a responsibility and kind of guiding and spearheading the people of Israel. Another way to think about this is that they were kind of like hometown heroes, someone who comes from your hometown area that people think fondly of because they went out and did something. They were these types of heroes, but they were not necessarily the people that were, trained to be kings or to be major leaders, but they had done something that actually achieved something significant for that community or reflect their nation well. This is something interesting, though, just as a quick note, is that we do this all the time, even with those who can serve within military duties. We can assume that they are then qualified to lead socially, politically, religiously in these spaces, and this is one of those moments where the Israelites are doing the same thing. It came up later on because the Israelites were frustrated that they weren't leading like the other kings, but they wanted to appoint them because they wanted to win the conquest at the same time. And God confronts the Israelites on this idea. See, they wanted a king because they saw a leadership void, but they struggled to imagine the type of king that they needed. So they put up these judges to help them, to guide them, that they trusted. But if you read the book of Judges, you will see that there is much lawlessness in this time period. There is recklessness in religious beliefs. There were military invasions. There's tribal civil wars. And the land of the Israelites were in shambles. They were always in constant tension with other nations. That's why they wanted the judges, because they wanted to be able to conquer and not get conquered. It was pretty chaotic. But also there was famine in the land. See, most biblical scholars assume that the famine was God judging the Israelites for their worship of false gods even. But it was common for people in this time period to worship Baal when they desired provision in their crops. It's very interesting here because many of the false gods of the time period, that they would go to Baal because they wanted provision. They wanted the harvest to be ripe. They wanted to reap the benefits of the fruit of the field. This is all going to make sense in a moment here. So they would go to Baal in their mind because he was the owner of the land and he was the controller of the land's fertility. For the land to produce fruit, right, they would go to Baal because Baal would be the provider of that. See, the judgment that the Israelites might have received, this is accurate then, was for neglecting trusting in Yahweh, but for pursuing false gods, even in light of a drought that they might have been experiencing. That maybe for them in these moments, that they start to trust and contend with these false idols in a hope of receiving blessings from God. It was in these moments that they didn't crush the false idols' altars, but they began to help build more of those altars to those false gods. So what does this famine serve in this story? How does this help us understand the purposes of what's going on in the book of Ruth? How do we understand this in light of even God's plans for his people, that something that God in his good grace will never desire in his creation, but is a reality because of a sin-ridden world, is still here? I mean, despite the tragic implications on humanity, we have to think about how we're going to consider famine seasons. How will we trust God in the scarcity? I mean, what if even something like famine could reign again in our lifetimes? Whom will we trust? Maybe for you, you're like, well, that's so far away from us, I can't even contemplate it because we have everything that's so processed around us to eat as food. So we cannot imagine being famine, right? But think about it for a moment. Like, it's not just famine in food, but you could be malnourished in other resources as well. See, there's much that we can learn here from this text, and I think we're going to see that throughout the story, but this famine land is what starts this narrative off in the direction. This is the whole reason why Elimelech moves his family away. See, some of us have been preparing for the famine. This is just a little side note I got for y'all. Some of y'all got like these storage rooms in your house. You've been storing up food for like a long time. Like, no, I'm just trying to be prepared just in case it gets a little bit sparse around here. Some of y'all have done it to your detriment too. Don't be the person, like when everybody starts freaking out, you take everything and nobody else has anything. Don't be that person either. That's for free too. On that note, when there was the scarcity of milk and whatnot and stuff like that for the little ones, I remember hearing like on the news, there's like stories like moms who were like pregnant jacking the milk from like the parents that needed it right now in the current moment, like taking it from the stores. Like, it's like, that's not good. So that's free for y'all. Don't do that. Don't be those people. Like, no, you got to be prepared. No, you need to care for everybody. So that's for free. But Elimelech, he moved his family with a vision, right? So this famine's setting in, the chaos is there, the instability is setting in. And so he's moving from Bethlehem to Moab. And if you know anything about Bethlehem, Bethlehem is known as the house of bread. That is the meaning of that name. So their family fled from the place as the house of bread to a place that they're hoping to get some bread because they're lacking. But on top of that, though, they're moving to a land that they even have tension with the Moabites. They weren't in the best of terms. So that shows how desperate they were in these moments because they were trying to get away from their current land, their homeland, because they were desperate, but they were also moving into another land just seeking to enjoy the taste of bread in the fields. They became homeless to some degree. They became refugees for the purpose of desiring to enjoy the taste of good bread. Just think about that for a moment. They left the comforts of Israel for the discomforts of living on the margins with the hope of experiencing redemption. The famine of the land set in, and so they went to another region, hoping just to experience some redemption in it. They didn't go on a pilgrimage to solidify their family by purchasing land and building a farm, but they were sharecroppers who were at the pleasure of other landowners. And this is interesting here as you understand this narrative. Because the Ephraimites here, that the land of the people they come from, that tribe was a well-off tribe in their land. They had the money, they had the resources. They didn't have much need for outsiders to get into their affairs. So when you're thinking about this story, this is not your rags to riches story for Elimelech's family, but this is a riches to rags story. Maybe you felt that even in your life. You felt like you were on the high of the mountaintop. You felt like your family was brought down low. You're trying to figure out how to build and to move forward. Maybe you felt like there was a season of life you were on a high mountain plain and it was like life is golden. Then you're hit by some obstacles and you feel like you're at a low point in life. This might draw near to you even. This is hitting them hard. They left everything. And this is probably a very humbling experience. And this is really interesting as we read this text because this family's trying to navigate that reality, and Elimelech's trying to just get his family to a healthy place. And so he moves his wife and his 2 sons to Moab, and they remain there. See, the sojourn was supposed to be for a season, but they ended up remaining there a lot longer than they ever had planned to because they were just trying to live. And why does this make sense for our understanding of the book of Ruth? Because it shows us so much more about her faith and her trust in God's providence. It wasn't like she joined into a family that had it all. It wasn't like she was joining into this stable group that was, everything was going well for them in life and it just looked like the golden path for them at the beginning. And then, her life just gets really hard and then she's then on this journey for redemption. But even from the inception of the relationship, the family wasn't in this stable position. It wasn't that life was great and then it got hard, but life was hard, then it got okay, and then it got hard again. That shapes our understanding, and that's how life is. Quite ordinary. Your life is met by a lot of ups and downs. You're being dishonest to yourself if you believe that your life is always on the mountaintop. Honestly, if you're looking at life, it's probably going up and down in many ways. Hopefully it's going up and down in the upward way, but you're feeling that tension, that reality. And the book of Ruth is a great example for us of what faithfulness can look like even in the face of discomfort, hopelessness, struggle. I mean, we think about the wisdom of Ruth and her trust in God's providence and how it can ring throughout the halls of church history, how that can be an encouragement to us. To know that even when many other Israelites were bowing their knees to Baal in hope of him providing, that Ruth and even her family would remain faithful. That even for someone like Ruth, she would look at her mother-in-law and say, I want your people to be my people, your God to be my God. Even in a moment when that was going against her culture, because she believed that Yahweh was the provider. So this sets up the stage for us in verse 1. As the text is describing the family moving there, they talk about this sojourn, and that helps us to understand what's going on. But it's something interesting I want to share with us about Elimelech's name. Here's what it means. Here's some irony in the story. My God is king. My God is king. So his name means that his God is king, but his family is fleeing from a land as refugees into this other place where it looks like everything in his life is not going well. So he's going to the Moabites who don't get along with them or does not like their God. And he's like, hey, I'm Elimelech. And back then, your names meant a little bit more than it does today. So people are like, what does that mean, My God is king. Your God is king, but you're impoverished. Your God is king, but you don't have what you need. You're a sharecropper. You're living off of our soil. You're living on the fringes. But it's also beautiful as well, too. Because his God was king, because he was trusting him even in light of the brokenness of his story. That he even sees that his God is king, even though his family story was not looking like it was going to blossom in the moment, but they were trusting him in faith that God would be the provider, that they know that he is. And this is why this book is a story of redemption. God redeeming the story of this family who sought faithfulness over comfort. God is redeeming their personal stories, even though they were marked by pain. And God brings Ruth into Elimelech's family for a reason. And here's the hard thing about Elimelech's story, because Scripture cuts short for us his story here. He doesn't even get to experience the fullness of the fruit of the story for his family. He trusts God in faith, move into the land to where the Moabites are at, to set his family up, to sojourn for a season, but then he ends up being there for a longer period of time. He passes away not seeing the other side of the fruits for his family. And for some of us, even that idea of being an Elimelech is frightening to us. That you would not be able to see the fruits of the redemption in your story, the fruits of the redemption in your family. But that still should not drive you away from faithfulness. That you take the step in faith, hoping, trusting God that he will keep building the life that he has called you to build, that he will keep protecting, he will keep looking out. Yes, the text is acknowledging that they were impoverished and that they had a need for more, but God clearly was meeting their needs for what they needed in those situations, in those moments. But Elimelech is taking this step of faith for his family. But we know on the backside all that God would do through this family. And I can only imagine how hard that would be, even for Naomi. She was walking with her husband in this journey with their 2 sons, trying to find a way. And maybe that's been you. Maybe your family's going through a season where you're all trying to find a way to make it and you're taking steps forward, seeking God for provision. And you're trying to make sense of your situation. See, it's interesting here because even how Ruth gets into this family is very intentional in God's hand, because if you know anything about the Moabites, they're from a different culture than Elimelech and his family. And the heartbeat of these 2 cultures were very different. One was seeking to worship Yahweh, the other one wasn't. And so we see something that happens in this story. They must have had some sense of a zeal to share the good news about God with this people, that Ruth would come to faith, that Orpah would come to faith in God and want to walk with him. But the narrative doesn't tell us all the details of how that happened, but we know that there's something that transpires where they join in and start following Yahweh. We know that because Ruth alludes to it earlier. Your God is my God. Your people is my people. I'm with you all now. So there's the familial element to that, but there's also the spiritual worship that's coming in that conversation. So this is all setting the stage for us. So you have Elimelech, you have Naomi, and then you have the boys that are there. They're now men. They take wives. But then Elimelech passes away, right? And then they take wives right after that. And Naomi's left with the 2 sons. And as the text describes that they were married for about 10 years. Ruth and Orpah were married to Naomi's sons. And during that 10 years, in their stories, it would be natural for them to think about the heritage of the family. That Naomi has lost her husband. She was probably hopeful that they would then receive grandchildren as well. But if you notice in the text, after 10 years, there were no grandchildren either. Now, this is very interesting for us to think about even this morning, because in their story, they moved to this land impoverished, longing for more, with hope that God would keep building their family. That Elimelech's making this move to create a better space for the next generation. He passes away. The sons meet their spouses, but then their spouses don't have children for the whole sake of keeping the name going forward, to pass on that heritage. They didn't have what they thought was going to come to fruition. So they were together 10 years, but then the sons passed away. And this is really interesting because this 10 years of time is, I think, very intentional in Scripture to help us understand that there was a extended season of them being together where the Lord did not produce children in their life. And this narrative is slightly different than even Genesis chapter 16, where even we see that it took 10 years for Sarah to not have children as well. But we see in Genesis chapter 16 that Sarah took matters into her own hands in those moments. But we see a little bit different here with Ruth and with Orpah because they don't go that same path. They keep walking in faithfulness, even though they had a desire for family. So if you're getting everything I'm laying down here, a lot of things aren't going the way they wanted them to go in their family story. And they might have been even tempted, like Sarah, to take matters into their own hands. And maybe that's the way it is today, even too. People are, when they don't get what they desire, they want, they'll be tempted to take matters into their own hands and to make it happen. But there's this moment where they were still holding on and clinging to God's promises, and they kept walking with God and kept journeying with Him as long as they could. So even in these moments of infertility, Ruth and Orpah were both experiencing famine even for their family. Yet they were hopeful in God. And for those who maybe have experienced this season in their life and they empathize or they can connect with this side of the story for these sisters, I just want to remind you that even in extended seasons, God has worked through many people's lives. That's similar with Sarah's and the Rachel's and the Hannah's. There was extended periods of times. There was many other people that were barren in this sense as well. And they can relate to you with a comfort and spirit there. But also, we have the sense of this story of Naomi's childlessness as well. The side of it we don't talk about often, the idea of parents losing their children before they pass away themselves. No parent ever desires that. In that sense of childlessness and the aspirations and the hopes and the desires to see their children build families and to flourish is the utmost desire, and also to see that next generation go forward. So the story is experiencing the brokenness in two different sides. From extending the family forward, from also the grandparents, but also from Ruth's and Orpah's perspective. So this family takes a step of faith to find refuge, to find hope in the midst of the season, and they're clinging to God, trusting His promises that He would be faithful. And I'm not saying that's going to be easy. For any of y'all that's been your journey, if you've walked through some of these types of scenarios, it's not easy to keep trusting God in faith that He's a promise keeper, that He loves you and that He cares for you, even despite your circumstances, even when money's tight, when you're longing for more, when you have desires for your family, when you feel famined. But that God comes near those who are brokenhearted, that He can meet you there, and that He can journey with you. It's just a moment when we're famine that we need to trust God more and not rely upon ourselves to make it through the famine seasons. It's going to be really easy for us in these moments to believe that, oh man, when I'm longing for, I just got to work it out. I got to find a way. I got to work out the numbers. I got to get another job and work all these things out. And that might be a part of the process. I'm not telling you not to work, because you don't work, don't eat. I'm not trying to tell y'all to go down that route. But there is something about you actually seeking God and trusting God in faith for provision. That God can actually meet you where you're at, and He can help you, and He can walk alongside of you. So Naomi hears about relief in Jerusalem. Y'all have heard about relief before, right? You run into relief when you know that it's there. So Naomi's like, hey, look, we're going to uproot the family. We're going to be out. And so we're going to go back to the land where the food is plentiful. But then this is where we notice a shift in the language. So it's not referred to anymore as Elimelech's family, but it's now Naomi's family, because she's now trying to steward the lives of her daughter-in-laws who are widows too. 3 widows journeying together. But she stops them on the way. And she looks at them and she says, look, why don't you all just go back to your mother's house and be with them? And then this is where she's really trying to be helpful to them and to encourage them to go back to their roots so that they can be with their family, so they can have the best life for her. Because Naomi's very honest right now. In her context, the money, the resources she has, she cannot provide for them. So that's why she's saying this might be better for you. It's not that Naomi didn't love them or care for them. She was trying to look out for them. But they wanted to continue with her. And this is where you know you got some good family here, when everything is funny and they still want to be with you. When it's not looking so hot and they still want to be there for you. She has some riders with her, right? Her daughter-in-laws are sticking with her, wanting to. And so as Naomi is desiring to go back to the harvest in Bethlehem, as they're on this road to experience that harvest, she kept on actually reiterating the story. She kept going back at her questions for them, because the Lord had finally provided a path for them back in Judah. But she wanted more for them. She genuinely cared for them and asked, this is what she said, she asked for the Lord to deal kindly with them in the same way that he has been good to her family. She had noticed the kindness of the Lord in them for caring for her, and she just wanted them to experience the kindness of the Lord themselves. So this is why she releases them. She's like, hey, I know you feel entitled to my family, but I'm releasing you to go marry. Go find another husband to be with. Go find someone that can provide for you in a different way than I can. She was freeing them from the obligation to care for her, because she wanted them to be blessed. So in a moment of frustration for Naomi, she's frustrated in her situation, but she's also trying to look out for the well-being of her daughter-in-laws. So she's trying to release them. So they wept together over this. And then this is where they say, no, we will return to you and your people. So this is a very tense and hard moment. A lot of emotions are everywhere. But they chose to walk with her into the moments of the pits of despair. And they were choosing the route of faithfulness. I don't know where you're at today, and I don't know if you feel like people have been walking with you in these moments where there's the highs and the lows. But it's healthy to have people walk with you in these moments. In this family story, it wasn't ideal, but they were trying to journey together. And you also have 2 people, 2 different perspectives. You both have Naomi's and you have Ruth's. And you also have Orpah's perspective here. And all of them have different vantage points on this story of how to move forward. And we can learn from many of them in different ways. So in seasons of famine, we might not be able to control the cause of our circumstance. But one thing that we can control is our response. You would think if hopelessness would set in, that maybe it would have just been it for this family. That maybe they wouldn't want to just move forward together. I mean, who wants to buy into a life that's marked by hunger, death, barrenness, and poverty? Like, you look at that and you're like, that's not the life for me. So what Naomi's doing in this moment, she's like, look, I can't guarantee you anything. I can tell you what we got. Choose your direction. Many of us know if we were at that crossroads, which way you would choose. And this is something for us to consider in this moment. Because sometimes we look at this story and we think, oh man, Ruth is so faithful, she journeyed with her. But many of us have been the Orpahs in the story. Like, at first you're like, yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, like, we ain't going to leave you. Oh, you really mean it, though? We good? Like, no obligation? Are you sure? Like, you kind of stepping out. You sure? We good? So we would more likely be like that. And so the second time she goes on to reiterate her situation, to explain to them how bad it is, that they can have a better life without her. She's like, look, y'all look at me. It's not likely that I'm going to get remarried. It's not likely that I'm going to have a stable income. Even if I did get married and had a child, you're telling me you're going to wait for that boy to turn into a man? And then you're going to then want him? Like, do you really believe that you're going to want all of those things? So at the same time as she's trying to offer them hope and joy, Naomi's struggling with the bitterness in her situation. She doesn't want them to buy into the bitterness of her situation. I think it's something we can learn from Naomi here, is that many of us, when we go into bitter seasons, we want to take people down into our bitterness. Naomi's trying to release them from her bitterness so they can move forward, so they don't buy into her vision. And we need to remember that. And sometimes we do that by sharing with people. We're trying to get them down to our level of how we feel, and that's not healthy. So then they can walk with us in it. You don't want someone to be walking with you that's at the same level of bitterness. That's not good. That's why you need people outside of your family to walk with you that have a different understanding of the situation. They're not fully in it with you. So in this moment, she's releasing, saying that you can go, move beyond. Because Naomi felt that the hand of the Lord was against her. She could not give them another husband. So she encouraged them to move on, because she knew that it would be bitter for her to put them through the turmoil to live with her again. But it's interesting, though, because Ruth responds. Orpah's like, gives her a kiss, is like, I'm out. But then Ruth responds, says, your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything, but death parts me from you. And Naomi's response this time is just like, all right. If you really want this commitment, if you really want this life, come on. She knew that nothing was going to change her mind, because Ruth had it set in her mind that she was going to journey with her. Because Naomi saw that she was determined, she was willing to let her to come. That was a big step of faith for Ruth, because the odds are stacked against her in this moment. But in faith, she felt like she was trusting God in this plan. That's why it's key for us to remember that your God shall be my God. Your people should be my people, and your God my God. She's trusting God in this. She's not trusting Naomi to work it out. She's not trusting her boss to work it out, another family member to work it out. She's trusting that God would work through a situation and circumstance. So with whatever you're going through in life, you need to look at the situation from, are you trusting God in faith? Or are you trusting yourself? Whom are you looking to, even when you feel famine, for the provision? On the other side of this, I don't want you to think that Orpah did not love her mother-in-law. She did. She begun the journey with her, but she just took those words to heart and departed. But the question for us today is, how would we respond in the famine? How are you responding in those famished seasons of life? We can continue to learn from the story how Naomi and Ruth dealt with it. In verse 19, they arrived back in Bethlehem, and the city was stirred because of them. They were surprised that Naomi had come back into town. And what does the text say that how Naomi responds? They say, is this Naomi? And she said to them, do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. Now, why would she say this? Why would she say, call me by a different name? And if you notice this in the scriptures, is that there's often times where, because of the meaning of names, that people will go by different names at different times. It meant a lot of value to that person and their identity of who they are. And so in this moment, as she comes back into Bethlehem, she knows that her name means lovely, that she's lovely. But she chose Mara because it meant I am very unfortunate. This is Naomi seeking to question God even for bringing her to this space in her life. She says it honestly. She said, I left Jerusalem full, but I'm coming back empty. I left with hope, but I'm coming back in despair. My family was intact. My family is now in shambles. We had confidence. Now I have pain and I have despair. She's bitter. She wants to blame God for her ruin. She's honest. But it's good for us to remember that our ruin comes from the effects of living in a sinful world. She wasn't mad necessarily just about the famine or the drought, but she was particularly frustrated about the loss of loved ones because her family was everything. And this is where I want you to know too, if you're struggling with the frustration, the bitterness, it's okay for you to talk to God openly and honestly. That God was able to talk with her through this, and he was able to receive her frustration. But this is where our also community is helpful too, because you can't just say, well, you know what, God, I just need to get it all out and let it all out on you and not allow yourself to be shaped in community, be formed, that you're not still trusting him in faith, asking him to work and move within your hearts. See, Naomi is frustrated because she feels like it's even God himself who is testifying against her. The Almighty has brought calamity upon me. In other words, what is so lovely about my life? She's like, I'm not even lovely to be around right now, let alone have you provided the life that I think that I needed or deserved or should have in this space. And maybe you've had those seasons of life as well that you know it, the bitterness is set in and you have not been the most lovely person to be around. This is where you should remember, you should praise God for the Ruths who rode with you when you were unlovely, who walked with you, reminded you of truth, God's faithfulness and promises that he could still work. And this happens to believers too, because even in this moment, this is not Naomi saying that she doesn't believe in God. She's very honest about her frustrations and her struggles. That's why she says, the Almighty has brought calamity upon me. Shaddai has brought calamity upon me. The Almighty, the powerful one, the one that's over all. Why would he allow the injustice to come to her? Maybe you've asked that yourself. God, why me? Not my friends are doing this and they haven't had this happen. My family members are going this way, they haven't had this happen. And when we feel the weight of injustice, we're going to be very tempted to look at others and their stories and to think, well, you didn't take their story in that direction. So why are you taking mine in this direction? She's raw. She's transparent here. She's honest about her misfortune. But she still is believing that God is over all in this situation. And that's key for you to remember. That even in her frustration, there is glimmers of hope because she's still believing that God is over all. So in the tension of our suffering, we can still look to him as Lord over all while we're even struggling to come to terms with our situation. It's okay to struggle with coming to terms, but you have to still keep looking towards God. Don't come to terms by yourself, locked away. Come to terms open and honestly before God and before his people, with people that can speak truth into your life, who can remind you of the hope of Jesus, that he is the Redeemer of our stories, that he is the one who holds us fast, that he is the Savior, the Lord over all. Because in this moment, in this story, Naomi did not have the foresight to understand how God could even work in her impoverished situation, in what feels like the rubbles of her family, what feels like everything that she had desired or wanted or hoped for had been taken away from her. She didn't even imagine how God might still use Ruth in her life to continue his story of redemption. There's this tension that we're seeing this morning. When you're famined, will you be faithful? Will you walk in it? There's going to be a lot of moods and a lot of feelings and emotions that come through in those seasons. Frustration, anger, worry, want, desire. But who will you go to in those moments? Will you look to yourself? Will you look at your story and try to make sense of it? Or will you look to the incarnate Son, Jesus Christ, who came and lived a sinless life among all of humanity in order to eventually go to the cross of Christ to provide redemption? Redemption that saves us from our sins, but redemption that also gives us hope for the future, that even though we might live in a broken, sinful world, even though we might experience the pressing elements of this world, that we're not hopeless because we know that there is a Redeemer. That even though our story right now might feel like we're wandering, it might feel like we are hopeless, it might feel like we don't have a future, that Jesus is still writing our story saying, I'm providing a very fine future for you that is intact and that is immovable, that he proves that at the cross of Christ. That you can reflect and look at the empty tomb and remember that he got up. That even though you feel like you're at your lowest moments, that Jesus went to the cross and died one of the worst deaths, and that he got up that next morning. But here's the difference for us. We don't get up in these situations based on our own ability to change it. We get up through the work of God, his Spirit working within us and trusting him in faith. So how do you live in the midst of the famine? How do you remain faithful? It's through trusting God through his Spirit to help you in those seasons, but you cannot do that on your own. See, some of us have been running on E for a while. And you haven't been talking about it with people. You've been struggling to open up about what's going on. You feel the sense of being famined. And it's impacting you. You are lashing out. You're frustrated. It's impacting your spouse, your family, everyone. But my question for you today is, what are you going to do in those famine seasons? Will you respond to it? Will you take the step of faith? Will you trust God as a promise keeper, as Lord over all, the Redeemer of all? Will we look to Jesus?